In the middle of the 19th century, a woman could be standing in the safety of her own parlor one moment and engulfed in an inferno the next. There was no warning, no great industrial accident, just a turn near a fireplace or a stray ember rolling across the floor. The culprit was not a weapon of war, but a garment of high society, a cage of steel and fabric that surrounded women like a fortress, yet ultimately acted like a prison. Within seconds of contact with a spark, the air inside the structure would superheat. The wearer, trapped inside a diameter of 6 feet of steel, often could not run, could not roll, and could not escape. In the year 1858 alone, the New York Times reported that 3 women a week were burning to death. Church bells rang for kitchen maids and archduchesses alike. And across the Victorian world, a single terrifying realization took hold. Fashion had become fatal. What people didn't realize at the time was that they were witnessing a collision of industrial technology and social vanity that would claim an estimated 3,000 lives. It was a massacre disguised as elegance. Anyways, I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present, and together we keep history reborn. Today, we are examining the crinoline. To the modern eye, it is just a funny, oversized skirt from period dramas. But the historical significance of this garment cannot be overstated. It was a technological marvel, a social necessity, and for thousands of women, a death sentence. To understand the devastation that followed, we must first understand the height from which fashion had risen. Before the 1850s, if a woman wanted the fashionable bell-shaped silhouette, she had to wear layers of heavy, hot horsehair petticoats. It was a heavy, unhygienic burden that weighed down the wearer with pounds of suffocating fabric. But in 1856, the Industrial Revolution arrived in the dressing room. A new patent for a bitty cage crinoline used flexible spring steel, the same material used to build bridges and railways. It was a mistake to think of this as merely clothing. It was a piece of architectural engineering. It was light, it was flexible, and it allowed a woman's legs to move freely for the first time in decades. It was liberated. However, this innovation was a double-edged sword. The structure created a vast hidden pocket of air underneath the skirt. In the era of open fires, candles, and gaslights, women were walking around with a highly oxygenated fuel source attached to their bodies. The steel hoops meant that if the fabric caught fire, it didn't collapse against the leg to smother the flame. Instead, the cage held the burning fabric away from the body, creating a perfect chimney effect. The fire would rush upward, feeding on the oxygen, incinerating the victim within moments. This society, seemingly so robust, had introduced a hazard into the domestic sphere that it could not control. The heat swallowed. Intricate machinery of daily life became a minefield. The flames recognized no rank. They took the queens of society and the girls who scrubbed their floors with equal cruelty. Consider the case of Margaret Davy. On February 13, 1863, she was a 14-year-old kitchen maid working in London. The requirements of her employment demanded she wear the crinoline to appear respectable. While reaching up to the mantelpiece to grab a set of spoons, her skirt swung too close to the grate. She did not stand a chance. The coroner's ruling was chillingly bureaucratic. Accidental death by fire caused through crinoline. We must understand the terror of facing this without modern medicine. There were no skin grafts, no antibiotics. Just the agony of the burn and the slow, inevitable failure of the body. But the horror was not confined to the domestic sphere. It played out on the public stage as well. In Philadelphia in 1861, at the Continental Theater, a group of young ballerinas was preparing for a performance of The Tempest. In the cramped backstage area, a single gas jet, unguarded, brushed against a gauze skirt. Within seconds, the dressing room was a scene of absolute horror. Because of the width of their cages, the women could not navigate the narrow corridors to escape. 9 dancers died from their injuries. It was a tragedy that highlighted the incompatibility of these industrial cages with the infrastructure of the time. It wasn't just the working class or the performers. In 1867, Archduchess Mathilde of Austria, aged just 18, was preparing for a gala. She was wearing a gauze dress over her crinoline. Trying to hide a cigarette from her father, she moved the burning tobacco behind her back. The gauze ignited. Her massive skirt became a pyre in the middle of the palace. She died shortly after, a victim of her own status. The tragedy even touched the families of the most famous men of the era. The half-sisters of Oscar Wilde, Emily, and Mary, were attending a Halloween party in 1871. As they danced, one sister brushed against a candle. When the other tried to help, her dress also ignited. They both perished. News in the Victorian world traveled slowly, but these stories traveled faster than merchant caravans. They were printed in broadsheets and discussed in hushed, horrified tones in parlors. Yet, the fashion remained. You might ask, why? Why did they keep wearing them? The realization that their best knowledge was useless created a profound psychological crisis. The press screamed for reform. The New York Times called the deaths an auto da fe of fashion. Satirical magazines like Punch mocked the garment, showing women unable to fit into omnibuses or requiring long-handled spoons to eat. But beneath the humor lay a grim reality. Florence Nightingale, the pioneer of nursing, looked at the data with her characteristic precision. In 1863 and 1864 alone, she estimated that at least 630 women had died from clothing fires. She called it a sati of the West, a ritual sacrifice of women to the god of vanity. But every rational attempt to stop the trend only seemed to feed it. To refuse the crinoline was to accept social invisibility. The technology existed to save them. Chemists had developed flame-retardant washes for fabrics, specifically tungstate of soda. It could have made the dresses safe. But there was a problem. The chemical made the fabric look slightly yellow and feel stiff. It did not look as fresh as untreated muslin. And so, given the choice between safety and the pristine aesthetic required by society, the chemicals were rejected. Laundresses refused to use them. It demonstrates a terrifying aspect of the human condition. The social pressure to conform to the silhouette was stronger than the biological instinct for survival. By the early 1870s, the fog began to lift. The fashion shifted. The round cage collapsed into the bustle, which focused the volume only at the back. The era of the burning skirt began to burn itself out. But we must ask ourselves, does that really sound like ancient history, or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? We look back at the Victorians with a mix of horror and detachment. We think we would never sacrifice our lives for an aesthetic. But then we look at the dangerous cosmetic surgeries of today, the toxic dyes in fast fashion, or the physical pain endured for the perfect image. The crinoline was not an anomaly. It was a mirror. It showed us that when culture demands a certain look, human beings will walk through fire to achieve it. The thousands of women who died in their own clothes serve as a grim reminder. Fashion is not just fabric. It is a force that can override our most basic survival instincts. Anyway, I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present. And together, we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.